everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and today we are joined by one of our favorites. She is the Bram Stoker Award-winning author of books like Vanishing Daughters, Forgotten Sisters, Children of Chicago, and It Came From Neverland. Her latest book is an anthology she edited. It's called Something Followed Us Home. It is in bookstores everywhere, September 29th. Cynthia Pelayo, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always great to talk to you. You are a very, very busy person right now. I know you've been doing writer's residency things. You just had a novel that came out a couple months ago, and now you have this anthology coming up. So since that is, first of all, I love that you made time for us, and I really appreciate it. But first of all, I want to talk about this anthology because it is the next thing up. So for anyone who hasn't heard about it yet, could you give the elevator pitch of what readers can expect from Something Followed Us Home?
Sure. So, Something Followed Us Home is a collection of short stories from some of the leading writers throughout Latin America. They're not just horror writers, they range in genre and tone. And I approached them all with a prompt, and they all delivered. I asked them, what haunts you from where you're from? And I just kind of left it really open-ended. And I just wanted to see what they came back with, because I wanted everyone to see the range of voices, of styles. I had authors. I have an author with like this great like meta detective story, Leopoldo Galtz. Then we have like a true crime story from Mariana Enriquez. Agustina Basterica gave us one of the most like, that story still haunts me. And reading it and editing it again and again, I just remember being up late at night like, this is terrifying. So that is the collection. It's out September 29th. What also makes it special is that it's being released simultaneously in English and Spanish, which is sort of like unheard of. That it's usually like things are spaced out with translations, but the publisher wanted to do a simultaneous English, Spanish, and it will be released throughout Latin America. So a total of 8 countries, which is amazing and terrifying all the same with my schedule. So
yeah, Augustina's story is amazing. Isabel Cañas wrote an incredible story. Mariana wrote a great story. You also have a story in this that is set in Puerto Rico, which I loved. What was the driving force behind, like, what was it like to sort of take hold of your own prompt and write that story? Did you already kind of have it in your back pocket when you told the other writers what was going to happen?
yes, I always knew that was going to be the story I wrote, because I'm from a town nearby. That's where I'm from. I'm from the mountains of Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
And this story takes place in Ponce, which is like the next biggest, like you think of San Juan, and then like the next biggest city is like Ponce. It's like closer to the West Coast. And I'm from like the mountainous region of where sugarcane plantations were abundant at one point, and coffee plantations as well. My family were coffee farmers. And this was a story I didn't learn about until, what's sad is I didn't learn a lot about Latin American history until my undergrad, because I had minored in Latin American history. So many of these things I didn't know anything about. And so I remember learning about like the Ponce massacre, and just like how heartbreaking that is. And I think it's kind of, I also thought about, I believe this was either close to the time or maybe when we were in edits, when Minnesota was going through a lot of like militarization as well. And so I was watching that, editing the story, thinking about the terror of having your own countrymen turn on you. And that's just so, it's like a betrayal, like an ultimate betrayal.
So I'm curious about, because you said you deliberately left the prompt very open to let all the writers in this anthology explore what they wanted to explore. Did anyone come back to you with like, what surprised you most about what all of these writers were able to deliver.
I think while they're so different, there is like this general energy throughout of like family and belonging. Like that sort of came out um pretty consistently. I think there's like a lot about family, a lot about what it means to belong. Even like Daniel Jose Older's story, that's kind of like fantastical. It's still about wanting to kind of be validated and recognized. Same with Ananda Lima's, which is so fascinating, and Juan Martinez's as well. There is something about families mentioned throughout pretty consistently, love and being seen.
That is something that I noticed in reading. I've not read every story in the collection because I just got my arc a few days ago, but I read as many as I could before we were talking. And there is a these stories are obviously it's horror, so they're very dark in a lot of places, but there's always this warmth coming through each of these stories, this feeling of uh, so many of these things, because they have to do with heritage, you know, are frightening and about the darkness of the past, but they're also about what's worth carrying forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that while some of them felt like really mythic, like Monica Ojeda's is like really mythic and it's like a perfect fairy tale. Others take place like today, very modern and even like a very modern tone. Um, and I think it was also very important to me to showcase Latin American identity um, that does really like, or in terms of a writer, that does really like straddle like this literary sense of like, and to show not just the stories are different uh, by the topic, but the way they're told, like the mechanisms that people use to frame. And Latin America, we often think, oh, where are the Latin American writers? And we often think of that through like a US lens, like where are they here in the United States? Literature is like rich throughout Latin America and Spain as well. And so I wanted to really like say, we've been here. We've been writing the fantastical for a very long time. We've been writing, magical realism was like a movement that I feel like it was a very specific movement in time, and many writers have carried that along with them. But I really wanted to show we're more than just what the Hollywood perception of us is.
Yeah, and as with all of the best anthologies, do a thing that I love, which is they send you home with some new writers to go check out. So if you're looking to expand your reading horizons, especially in genre fiction, like pick this book up. You will find at least one or two new writers to get obsessed with that you don't already know about. Um, I am going to ask something about It Came From Neverland because I did not get to talk to you when that book came out, and that is one of my favorite books of the year.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I love it. It might be my favorite book of yours.
Wow.
Uh, when did you realize? First of all, for those who don't know, and I don't think this is a spoilery question, It Came From Neverland is basically what if Peter Pan was a monster, and Wendy Darling is now an adult and is dealing with these horrible memories of what happened in Neverland, and then Peter starts to sort of fade back into her life in interesting ways. Um, the thing that fascinated me most about this book is the connection you draw between the inherent ruthlessness of childhood, like the way that kids can be extremely ruthless and dark in their own way, and the way that global war works, because the book is set during World War One. And I just found this really interesting connection that it was that Peter is this monstrous, amoral being existing in Neverland, and World War One, which is this monstrous, amoral conflict, is happening at the same time. Was that a connection that you saw from the beginning, or is that something that I'm just finding in my own reading of it?
No, that's certainly something that I had always kind of like picked up on. I I had a you know, people always wonder why was this book so short and why is this book so long? It's like the reality is we're given word counts. And so that
Mm.
was the word count that I was given. And there was so much that I wanted to do in this book and I really wanted to like heighten the World War One aspect a lot more. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to. And so I was only able to kind of like highlight that through like smaller scenes or through like vignettes that are kind of like a vignette, like the horror sequence there when they're in Neverland and it just kind of gets like crazy far out. I think of that
Hmm.
more as like my Freddy Krueger sort of moments. Like,
Yeah.
like when Freddy would pull you into like dreamland and it's just like bizarro world. Um, but there is like almost like this manic energy that happens during war and war times that I just kind of wanted to explore more and like the exploitation of youth, and how I just made, especially World War One was like the first time we had mechanized war. A lot of people don't realize also that a lot of the young men that were signing up to go to World War One were like children. They
Yep.
were like farmers' sons. And it was like stay on the farm or make some money and get fed every day. And you had like young kids. Like it was you weren't supposed to, but they were lying. Who's in a check? They were lying about their age. And just like the number of people that died, like it was a catastrophe. And I think we just kind of like brush these things aside and just keep moving and we don't like sit as a human race and really like reckon with the things that we've done to one another.
I think despite the word count limitations and despite having to turn this novel in a certain length, I think that comes through.
Thank
It
you.
it absolutely worked so well for me. And if you haven't read it, Came from Neverland, everybody like go get it. I promise you, it's one of the best genre novels you will read this year. Um, so we're gonna you last time you were here, we talked about one of the greatest horror or horror adjacent, I guess, short stories ever written. Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. This time we're going to talk about another great short story, considerably older. This time we're going to talk about The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, which is, I think, a companion piece to The Telltale Heart, in that it is also about nagging guilt and trying to prove that you are not insane, despite like very clearly probably being insane. I love this story. Cynthia, what do you remember about your first encounter with this story?
I remember just like just like the slow dread throughout. Um, I remember reading it, I think around the time of The Telltale Heart, and they are both like really great companion pieces if you just want to spend an evening with Poe. But it's definitely like the dread. Like you are reading a confession and then you're just like trying to like piece together like what happened? Who is this? And I if you've read any of my stories, you know that I like to do something that's called like I call it like my Alice in Wonderland effect, that you just kind of feel like what is happening. And I think this story is a great example. You don't know what the hell is happening, and you just know things are strange.
Yes, that's definitely because it begins like you said. It's a confession. It's a guy writing down and essentially telling us, um, you, I would, if I were reading this story and someone else wrote it, I would think I'm crazy. So I'm essentially I'm just going to tell you what I experienced, and you're going to think whatever you want to think, but this is how I saw it. And it's about a guy who uh introduces himself as an animal lover. He loves animals. He has pets. He married a woman who also loves animals. They adopt a black cat, which he names Pluto. And over the course of a couple of years with Pluto in the house, he starts to grow more and more addicted to alcohol. He's very clear about this, that like he's an alcoholic and he's constantly dealing with drinking too much. And over the course of his time with this cat, he goes from being like best friends with the cat's my favorite pet, to I hate this cat. I don't know why this cat is bothering me. It follows me everywhere. I hate it. And one thing that I think is fascinating about the story is it could have just been entirely about this guy's relationship with this cat. And it could have ended with the famous impression on the wall. I feel like Poe could have cut the story off there and it would have still been this really haunting story of a man consumed by addiction and the way that addiction can rewire your brain. But he keeps going.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then you're just like, okay, this is how does this get worse? And so
Yes.
there was like a horror movie anthology. Was it Tales? I don't know if it was Tales from the Dark Side that did.
It was Tales of Terror,
Tales of Terror.
which was a Roger Corman movie from oh, and Two Evil Eyes also did it. It's been adapted a bunch of different times, and it's in a couple of horror anthology films. Tales of Terror from 1962 and Two Evil Eyes from 1990. Dario Argento directed it in 1990, and then it was also in the 2023 Mike Flanagan Fall of the House of Usher. He kind of did his remix of the Black Cat.
'Cause I'm trying to remember. There was the one that did the Black Cat, and it was a man like in a wheelchair, and I think he's recounting the Black Cat story, and it's very different, but I just remember that kind of staying with me as well. And I believe like the cat kind of like crawls out of him. If anybody remembers this, please let me know what horror movie that was. What's also interesting about this story is there's I'm gonna get right into it. There's something to do with the walls, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there is
Yeah.
something that's a device that's appeared in other Poe stories. Um, the cask of Amontillado. There's another
Mm-hmm.
story where like somebody is like walled up,
Yep.
and this is just a theme that I feel like appears again and again. And I almost wonder if it's like Poe talking about evil things that we have suppressed and that will just kind of come up to the surface.
Well, and it's in Telltale Heart too. With except instead of a wall, it's a floor. But it's
Yeah.
the same. It's the same kind of thing. It's the same. I also think I feel like the Raven is similar. The Raven is very much about like I'm just alone in my house and these external forces are starting. I think that Poe thought about that a lot. I think that he thought about the ways in which we wall off our guilt and our darkness. You know, having lived a kind of a rough life, a life surrounded by death. I think he probably thought about that a lot, about the ways that we choose to suppress all of our darknesses.
Right, that's true with the Raven. The Raven's there taunting the narrator, um, with the telltale heart, this the beating heart, and here is the cat
It's the cat,
meowing
yeah.
behind the walls.
Yeah. And so we talked very briefly about I said that he could have cut the story off just with what happens to Pluto, which is the initial Black Cat in this story. I also wanted to sort of loop back to when they get the Black Cat, when they adopt Pluto. The narrator says that his wife, who is somewhat superstitious, tells him, you know what they say about black cats. They say that black cats are witches in disguise, which apparently was a thing that Poe also owned a black cat, and apparently like wrote an essay in which he even noted like people say black cats are witches in disguise. So I do think like is the story's not autobiographical, but I do think that Poe was probably just sitting there looking at his cat and going, what if you were a witch? What would you do to me if you actually were a witch?
Right. He was fascinated with like symbols and codes. Like he would at points, I believe there was a series where he had asked people to send in ciphers to like the newspaper so that he could break codes. So
Yeah.
he was really fascinated with like codes and symbols and patterns. And so I think many of his stories are just like ritually layered. So I agree with the what you said about the black cat who's probably sitting there staring like, what would you do? Or what are you thinking?
So what essentially happens then is this guy just gets increasingly acrimonious toward this cat. And one night he comes in drunk and the cat bites him. And he gets so mad that he pulls out a knife and cuts one of the cat's eyes out. And that is honestly, to me, the most brutal thing that happens in the
Yeah.
story. To me, I don't know why. To me, it is I guess because I think it's probably worse to torture an animal than it is to just kill one, you know. Um I think, obviously don't go kill a cat, but if the idea of grabbing something that lives in your own home and that you ostensibly want to care for and hurting it like that's the part that cuts me the deepest. It also, we were talking about symbols, it also feels like he is sort of, the cat has two eyes. You cut out one eye, you sort of he's sort of closing off part of himself. Like it's basically, to me, it's like the end. The man who we meet at the beginning of the story, who is an animal lover and a kind person who's just kind of struggling with his drink a little bit. That man is gone now.
Yeah.
You carve out the one eye. That man is gone, and his other half, this darker, meaner version of himself, is all that's left.
Yeah. And that and there's something to that, right? I think back to like, reading what is Poe saying without saying it. And maybe there's something to you never really know someone because
Hmm.
this is someone that supposedly loved this cat. And then to see, regardless if it was like the drink that had, you know, influenced that behavior, it still caused such a violent act. And you're right, that is the point in the story that just feels like this is a escalation and we can't go back
Yeah,
to yeah.
yeah, you will never be the person that you were before that moment, which uh for us recovering alcoholics, as I am, we refer to that as hitting bottom. But this story goes further. um which basically, he explains the cat healed, the cat eventually seemed like it wasn't in pain anymore, and then I forget what prompts him to do this, but he decides the cat needs to die. He's tired of looking at the cat. He can't stand the sight of the cat anymore. So he goes out into the garden next to the house, hangs the cat from a tree. Um, which that, like I said, in any other story, like, we could be wrapping up here. We could be like, this is a metaphor. This is a story about a man breaking himself with his own cruelty, and he will never be the same ever again. And we could almost leave it there, and it would be this very kind of modern existential horror story almost. But then the house catches on fire.
Yeah.
That night, basically, he kills the cat. That night the house burns down. He and his family manage to get out of the house, and then when he goes back the next day to sort of examine the wreckage, he sees that one wall of the house is sort of kind of still standing a little bit, and it's a wall that had recently been replastered, and the plaster was still sort of drying, and all the bystanders are sort of gathering around this wall looking at it, and he uh goes to see what it is, and there is an impression in the wall of the cat with a noose around its neck.
Um,
And this to me is the weirdest linguistic thing that Poe does in any of his stories I've read, because it's hard to describe what's happening, but it's basically like, imagine, for listeners, imagine there was a wall with wet plaster, and you put your hand behind the wall and pressed and made this shallow impression of your hand that looked like it was coming out of the wall at you. That's what happens with the cat. And in trying to explain this impossible thing, the guy goes, "Oh, I bet what happened is the house caught fire. Someone was trying to get our attention. They cut the cat down from the tree and threw it at the house. And that's how this happened. That's the only explanation I can come up with, but that must be what it was." And we as readers are sitting there going, this is not a normal thing. There's no way that this was a normal thing that happens, but for this guy, he is clawing, and it reminds me of your stories, like what you said a few minutes ago, that you're very much just kind of sitting there like, what is happening? How is
Yeah,
this possible?
yeah. Like I think he hangs the cat because looking at it is just a reminder of this awful thing that he did. So it's guilt and shame. And so very often when somebody sees something and it causes them guilt and shame, they want to destroy it because they don't want that reminder about themselves. And then I think with the outline of the cat on the building, and he's just kind of like, yeah, maybe someone painted something. I think that's almost a stand-in of like people will just kind of say they'll just reach for anything to kind of like cover up the awful things that they did. And it's almost like they have to create this new reality because they can't sit with what they did.
Which is not at all relevant in 2026.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's why I wrote a whole book about gaslighting with
Yeah.
Neverland. It's just like, yeah. Yeah.
So that happens, and that is obviously, it shakes him to his core. And like he kills the cat to get rid of the cat is a symbol of his guilt over his cruelty. He kills the cat and thinks that symbol is gone. I'm done with this cat. Then the cat makes that impression in the wall, and that is something that you cannot forget. It is so strange and singular that it just sticks in his head. And he and his wife move into this kind of crummy apartment because they can't afford a house. And he's still drinking. He's still going out nights to bars and getting plastered. And he meets another cat at a bar one night and thinks like, fresh start. Okay, this cat. And the interesting thing about this cat is it is black, except on its chest it has one patch of white. And he's like, because the first time he sees it, he's like, "Oh God, it's the ghost of my cat." And then he goes, "Oh no, it's a different cat. I can take this cat home. My wife will love it, and we will be fine." And the longer that this goes on, of course, the more he starts getting reminded of what he did, to the point that the white patch of fur on this cat starts to slowly resemble a noose.
Yeah.
So it's and this is something that I think comes up in a lot of your stories, and I think it's in, you just talked about gaslighting in Neverland. This idea of fantasy and reality colliding in a way that they blend, like Vanishing Daughters, I think, is a lot like this too, where all of these things are sort of merging, and it becomes immaterial whether a character is actually seeing something or imagining it. What matters is that they're experiencing it. Um, and so he's having this vision of this cat as a yet another sign of, oh, I should also mention the new cat is also missing an eye, but
Oh,
he didn't hurt this cat, not yet. But the cat's fur starts reminding him of the noose that he used to hang Pluto, and so he again is like, "Oh, I got to kill another cat. That's the only way out. I got to kill another cat." And so he takes the cat to the basement of this building where there is yet still more wet plaster. There is wet plaster on the wall from some work that was just done, and so he's like, "Well, I'll kill the cat with this axe that I have, and I'll bury it. I'll hide it behind the wall." Which if this dude understood the recurring symbols in his own story, he would probably be like, I should keep the cat as far away from walls as I can.
Yeah.
But so he goes to do this. His wife discovers him doing it and tries to stop him, and he puts the axe in his wife's head.
Yeah.
And from that point on, the voice of the story changes in these really subtle ways where it no longer he is no longer shocked by anything that is happening. From the moment that his wife that he puts the axe in his wife's head, there's no horror, there's no regret. He just goes, "Oh, okay, well, I got to get rid of this body. Here's this wall."
Yeah.
And walls his wife up inside. And as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking about wet plaster, which and wet mortar, which come up twice in this story. And it's this I'm getting this impression of what is wet plaster? What is wet mortar? Well, it's possibility. It hasn't hardened yet. It can still become something else. It can still these are inflection points in his life where he could make a different choice and he does not.
Right. Yeah. No, and it just kind of like you're right about how the voice is just so calm. He's just
Yeah.
like relinquished his like the sanity's gone. It's checked out completely at that point.
Yeah, and this is sort of the opposite of this is where the story I think diverges a little bit from Telltale Heart, because Telltale Heart is about a guy who does something that he thinks is reasonable and then slowly goes insane with guilt over it. This is more about a guy who reaches sort of the end of his madness and is just like, okay, it's just time for me to be a reasonable man who has a body to get rid of. And it doesn't matter that this is a woman that I was married to and ostensibly loved. I now just have to take care of this. And
Right.
it is so eerie the way that he just takes on this tone of I pulled the bricks apart, I pulled the wet mortar apart, I put my wife in the wall, I put all the bricks back, and y'all, it looks perfect. It looks like no one was ever there. It looks exactly the way it did when the workmen laid the bricks. I am a genius. And
It is
um
absolutely it's chilling. That's what yeah, definitely. Yeah.
it's really chilling. And then you have this is again a comparison to Telltale Heart, because the police come and they say like, what happened to your wife? And he's like, I don't know. They're like, we're gonna search the house. He's fine, search the house, I don't care. And they search all around and they don't find any evidence and they're ready to leave, and he's like, yep, thank you for your time, officers. And they start to hear this sound coming from the basement wall, and the cat that he had not managed to kill before his wife stopped him, it turns out had crawled into the wall while he was breaking it up and sat there with his wife. And he didn't know this. And so the last image in the book is the policemen rip the wall apart and they find his wife covered in gore. I forget exactly how he phrases it. The final line is so great. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, because it's been a couple of days,
Oh yeah.
clotted with gore is such an amazing phrase. Stood erect before the eyes of the spectators, upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. Ah,
Whose craft had seduced me. That stands
yes.
out now that we talked about witches. That actually stands out. Whose craft had seduced me into murder. He can't even take responsibility here at the end. It's the cat's fault.
No. Yeah, it's the cat's fault. And this is where I kind of come back to I can't help but see it through this lens because I am a recovering alcoholic. Being an alcoholic rewires your brain. When you are binge drinking, your brain does not work the same way. And that includes when you're sober.
Hmm.
You start to uh you start to want to view and some of that is guilt and shame. You are feeling this feeling that everything in my life is wrong. I have met nothing is going the way I want it to go. I really wish I could stop drinking, but I can't. So the reality often is that you're in denial and you haven't hit that point where you realize you need help with this, but you start blaming external forces,
Yeah.
or you start imposing a certain mythology on yourself. You start becoming the tortured soul. You know,
Mm,
you decide that you're going to be, that you're going to be Dylan Thomas. Like, fine, I'll be the drunken poet if I have to be, or if that's what it means that I get to keep drinking. And that is this guy. This guy is just completely like, look, I swear to God, this all happened exactly the way I'm saying it happened.
yeah.
I didn't change anything. You can think I'm crazy if you want, but this is how it happened. It was the cat's fault.
It's just so cold and meticulous the way it's like laid out into the very end. And I think that's what makes this one, the Black Cat, more terrifying than the Telltale Heart.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's this descent into madness that's happening in the Telltale Heart. Here, he's cold and steady throughout, and you're like, this is terrifying.
Yeah, it's it's such a great, like, it feels to me like Telltale Heart 2.0, which, not to knock the Telltale Heart, it's an incredible story,
Yeah.
but I feel like Poe is playing with those same themes and adding some extras on top. It's To me, it's one of his most like thematically mature short stories. Um, it has all of the gothic stuff that you want. It has the shocking ending that you want, but there is so much with the alcohol and the plaster and the witchcraft, and you can look at any one of those threads and find a through line through the entire story and just focus on it that way. But when you take them all at once, it becomes. And by the way, we've been talking about this story for half an hour. This
Yeah.
story is 8 pages long.
Wow. Yeah.
It's
Gosh, I was just about to say, and then there's the fire and the impression on the wall. Like so much happens in these few pages.
So much happens. Um, so you mentioned, kind of as we started discussing this story, that the story draws on certain things that you like to use in your own work, namely the feeling of being thrown into the deep end and not quite being sure what's happening. Uh, what what made it such an impactful story for you that you decided that you would bring it to this podcast? Were you thinking about particular works of yours at the time, or just sort of the general impression that you feel like your work has?
I think the general, I mean, a few things. Like I feel like the narrator, for one, is it an unreliable narrator? Is it reliable? It's like you don't know what to believe, and this cold confessional voice. Um, and I think there's like this weird psychological like rumination that he's almost like trying to do with himself and trying to like prove to us like this is why this is true and this is why this happened. Um, and I think Poe does that with some of his stories. What I also liked about this is that it is definitely domestic horror, and maybe nothing overtly supernatural about it, but it feels supernatural all throughout. And I think if you could do that, it's like super effective. And I think that's something I would love to do, be able to do. Like every time I try to create something that's very like set in realism, like ghosts just appear, and I can't help it.
Well, I do. I mean, I like your ghosts, so I don't, I don't begrudge you your ghosts, but I would like to see what a Cynthia Pelayo story that plays with that looks like. But yeah, Vanishing Daughters. I was thinking about that with the wall of radios and the talking to ghosts and stuff, and like it feels like you start that way, and then yeah, the ghosts just creep in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I've just the also the many, well, at least Vanishing Daughters and the last three books I've written them under various like psychological pressures, you know. So like Vanishing Daughters, there was a lot going on in my life I'm sorry, Forgotten Sisters, there was just a lot going on in my life, my career life at that point. Vanishing Daughters was a book I was literally like full on grieving. I started writing that the week my dad died. And I just remember being like, this is going to be the weirdest book I've ever written, because I was in a fog and I couldn't, it was impossible to get out of that fog. And so I just had to commit. The book is going to be a fog and I cannot do anything else. And then with Neverland, I was I was still working through the effects of CPTSD. And one of the things that I discovered of being a victim of like long-term traumatic events and traumatic things is that trauma, like your brain processes trauma like a physical blow. And so
Hmm.
like you it causes brain damage. And what I found interesting at that point was my thinking was so like clipped and short, and I couldn't really hold on to things for an extended period of time. And I had committed to, I'm going to write a book that is a character who is in full on CPTSD. This is what it feels like. It just feels disconnected. And so I think each of those books that I've written are exploring the things I was exploring through, and I'm showing that through the characters. And so what Poe was doing here is just like, here is this cool, calm, cold, collected person, and how do they rationalize their experiences?
I do love that, especially when he talks about the cat's eye of fire and the craft of the cat at the end, that you can. And this brings up something that also recurs in your work, which is fairy tales. It almost reads, if you want to read it as a supernatural horror story, you can read it as a fairy tale about this man who was set upon by a witch and these things that happened to him. And then you get to question how much of this is his fault and how much of this is the witch's fault. Did the witch do all of this, or did the witch just bring up certain qualities in him that are inherent in him? Or you can read it as a completely realistic short story about a guy losing his mind and murdering his cat and then his wife.
Right, like the the line between a true crime story here or like a supernatural story is very thin. So I
It's
do really like that a lot.
it's very thin. But what you were saying about what was going on in your life when you were writing each of the last three novels reminded me of something, and I'm just gonna read it here because this is something our friend, your friend and mine, Haley Piper, posted on Blue Sky yesterday. And she wrote a cheat code for creatives. If you let your personal sadness and genuine soul deep horniness into your art, it's pretty much immune to being co opted by modern fascists who
Mhm.
focus mainly on selling a wholesome heartland that they can use as an excuse for violence they'll label as glory. Um, so
Yeah.
that's just a beautiful sentiment, but it also brings us back to something I like to talk about a lot on this show, which is the importance of sincerity and earnestness in your work. Um, you talked about all the things going on in your life, and the way that Vanishing Daughters became a fog, and the way that Came From
Oh,
Neverland became about CPTSD. Um, you don't have to know those things about Cynthia Pelayo in order to read those books and enjoy them. But reading them with all of that in mind, you understand that there is something very genuine, something that comes from you and only you that is in the work. And I think that that is the secret ingredient. If there is a secret ingredient to great art, I think it's that.
yeah. And and I know, like, I just know my books won't resonate with many readers because many readers are looking for like a cinematic, fun, pulpy, gory experience. And you're not going to get that with one of my books. um, like Children of Chicago was me processing the anger of growing up in inner city Chicago and seeing so many of kids I grew up with die. And The
Mhm.
Shoemaker's Magician was me I mean, I'm still processing this. Me processing what does it mean to be a parent of a disabled child? And you have to, like, your life now is not, I have to protect me. Now I have to protect you, not just to 18, but the rest of your life. Like, that is like, whoo, that's overwhelming. And so I think every single one of my books, and actually, it's funny, I'm returning to that theme with Everina. I am reworking Frankenstein. It's not like a Frankenstein retelling, but it has the vibes of it. And because Mary Shelley wrote that book when she was grieving her infant daughter. And so I
Mm.
wanted to write this story or that those themes through a grieving mother's lens. And so that's where I'm putting myself next. I'm not a grieving mother, but I a mother who has to like protect something that's very fragile. So, and I think Frankenstein the monster is something that's very fragile.
Yes. So since you brought it up, I'm very eager to read your next book, and I love that it is inspired by Frankenstein. Uh, Frankenstein is one of those narratives. I mean, it's obviously it's never gone away. It's been 200 plus years, and it's not going away. But it feels like the last 5 to 10 years of the horror world on the page and in film, there has been this resurgence of Frankenstein as a narrative concern, and that goes for like straightforward adaptations, like what Guillermo del Toro did, and also uh, films that riff on the concept. Like I'm thinking about the Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, which is brilliant, and there's a movie called Birth Rebirth, which is riffing
I
on
saw
that.
it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. There's also at Lisa Frankenstein, if you want a fun version of it. There are
Mm.
lots of riffs on Frankenstein happening culturally right now. Why do you think that it is right now such an attractive narrative? Or why was it for you? We'll do it that way.
Well, I mean, for me, a number of reasons, but I think ultimately is the responsibility of creation. Like Victor, Victor was obsessed with creating something, and then he creates the thing, and then he abandons it.
Hmm.
And so I think today we're definitely seeing that in technology and biotechnology and these mad scientists of men in the tech world obsessed with creation, wanting to create robots, wanting to create the perfect baby. They want to make the thing, but I don't think, I think that's where it ends, their fascination. I don't think they understand that creation is also care and love and guiding the thing. And so I've always been, I think I read Frankenstein quite a few times. I've studied it extensively in my doctorate program, and I cry every time I read the monster talk because he just wants to be loved, and the one thing that he wants, the world refuses to give him. And I'm terrified of where we're going. Uh, I think we're letting technology and biotechnology off the rails.
When is that book out?
Next summer, I think.
Okay, we'll have to have you back for the Frankenstein, the Cynthia Pelayo Frankenstein special, because I could use an excuse to reread Frankenstein. Um, so very excited about that. But for now, everybody go pre-order your copy of Something Followed Us Home. It is out September 29th. Cynthia, it's always great talking to you. Before we let you go, will you let everyone know where they can find you online and if you have any events coming up for the book that you'd like to plug?
Oh, events. I'm trying to stay local as much as possible because mom. Uh, but I will be at Exile in Bookville September 29th for the launch with Juan Martinez and Ananda Lima. You can find me on my website, cynthiapelayo.com. I'm also on Instagram, Cynthia Pelayo Author, and Substack, Cynthia Pelayo Author.
Our guest has been Cynthia Pelayo. Cynthia, thank you so much for being on the show again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it too.
Thanks once again to Cynthia Pelayo for being on the show. It is always a delight to talk to her. Something Followed Us Home is available September 29th, wherever you get your books. You should pick it up. It's great. You should also go pick up It Came From Neverland, which is available wherever books are sold. And, pick up some of Cynthia's other books while you're at it. She's great. She writes cool stuff. Go follow her on her social so you can keep track of all the cool stuff she is doing. And if you want to keep track of everything we are doing, the best way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will find new guest announcements, every episode of the show, what's coming up soon in terms of stories we'll be talking about, giveaways, things like that. Head over there and give us a follow if you haven't already. You can also find us on Facebook under The Scares That Shaped Us, and you can also find us on YouTube if that is how you prefer to listen to your podcast. Thanks once again to everybody who came out for the live stream we did with Clay McLeod Chapman earlier in the month. I really appreciate the support there. And of course, if you like the show, please tell your friends, let them know about this cool thing we're doing. If you have the energy and the will, head over to the podcasting platform of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us tremendously to get featured on these platforms and grow our audience. That's it for us this week. We'll be back next week with another brand new episode. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shape.